So on behalf of the New York State Radiology Society Committee on Outreach and Professional Opportunity that I co-chair, I'm Judy Yee, by the way, that I co-chair with Nolan Kagetsu. Welcome to this webinar. It's a very special topic, and it will be given by a very special person, Dr. Elizabeth Arleo. And I'm going to let you know a little bit about her, but she's extremely accomplished. She's a professor of radiology at Weill, Cornell, and an attending radiologist at the New York-Presbyterian Hospital. She's also editor-in-chief of the Radiology journal, Clinical Imaging. She also has published her own 2 books, First Eat Your Frog and Other Pearls for Professional Working Mothers. But, and I've heard some of this talk before from Elizabeth through the SCARD lead program. And a lot of the pearls that she's going to talk about are applicable to not just working mothers, but working anybody. So I think we'll learn a lot from that. And then she just had a book come out last year entitled Bye Bye Mama's Milk. Dr. Arleo has received multiple honors and awards, including the 2017 Glimcher Award for Excellence in Mentoring Women Faculty from Weill Cornell, the 2018 Distinguished Educator Award from the New York Rankin Society, and the 2022 Alice Ettinger Distinguished Achievement Award, recognizing lifetime achievements and lasting contributions to radiology from the AAWR. However, Elizabeth Arleo considers her greatest professional legacy to be her compassionate care of patients and for her advocacy for improved family medical leave in not only radiology, but beyond. So it's a true pleasure to introduce Dr. Arleo, who will teach us about First Eating Your Frog and Leadership Pearls. Dr. Arleo.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction. I hope people have lunch and are not like turned off by the eating a frog. There will not be actually any literal frog eating. I hope you enjoy your lunch or your caffeine, whatever you have with you. So this is my disclosure slide, as Judy mentioned. And so I just wanted to open by asking a question to you. Can you think of a time in your head in the past week or month or year when you have felt overwhelmed? Consider closing your eyes for 10 to 15 seconds to tap into a memory, small or large, and just remember viscerally how it felt. I'm going to do the same. You can open your eyes now. You know, how did it feel? Not good, right? Maybe you felt like you were drowning. What came to mind for me, the first thing that came to mind was just on Tuesday, what all I said to the mammotech I was working with. How is it that I have 5 patients here at once? Like, what is going on? And then I just had to sort of have a deep breath. And I said to her and to myself, like, I'm just going to take each patient one by one as they were imaged, and we will give my undivided attention to one at a time. We will get through. But I really, really felt overwhelmed, and actually felt much better when one of my colleagues, chatted me through the secure system saying, oh my gosh, this is quite a day. And sort of just knowing that you're not alone sometimes in feeling overwhelmed can be very helpful. So we are not alone if we have the overwhelmed feeling. And from a June 2024 Forbes Health article, here are some statistics about feeling overwhelmed. In the past month, 33% of adults reported feeling overwhelmed by stress. And in the past year, 74% of people have felt overwhelmed or unable to cope. And these are not good statistics, and yet they become even more worrisome when paired with results of a 2022 study by the American Psychological Association, which showed that in the last month, again, from when this was published, as a result of stress, 21% of US adults reported experiencing forgetfulness, 20% reported inability to concentrate, and 17% report difficulty making decisions. All of which is particularly dangerous if your day job is in medicine in general, or in radiology in particular, as it is for most of us here. On top of that, taking care of patients may not be the only thing you're doing, irrespective of gender or family structure. Many of us care for or hope to care for and have children or work with people or supervise people that do. And speaking from experience, I think it's fair to say that it's not an easy time to be a working parent. Politically, there's still no US federal law with the right to paid family medical leave, which, as Judy mentioned, is a real career passion of mine outside the clinical practice of radiology. Economically, high quality childcare and elder care for that matter is expensive and hard to find. And career wise, in radiology and beyond, we're living in an age of, I feel like, information overload, desire for instant results, and really uncurbed distractions. So even if you're fortunate to have, the most supportive partner, it's really a triple whammy, managing, your career, your relationships, and hopefully yourself to some degree. And I would say women in particular may feel like they're failing in this respect. And I would say to this, it's not an innumerable number of individual failures. This suggests that there's some systemic failure at a certain level. But it takes time, obviously, to make political and economic changes, time that working parents are already short on. And so in this book, which was published almost 3 years ago, March 2023 on International Women's Day, I curated from, at the time, 15 years of from reading nonfiction, advice from mentors and sponsors, some of whom are on this call, and really personal lessons in the trenches. Lessons that I have learned and I'm definitely still learning that have been helpful for me in striving for success in radiology and beyond. And the book is titled First Eat Your Frog and Other Pearls for Professional Working Mothers, because that's my experience. I've only experienced being a professional working mother, so that's what I know. But by speaking, in the past 3 years, I've had some very gratifying feedback that many of the lessons learned, and as Judy was saying, are applicable really to all genders, whether you're before, during, or after, or never having children. And I'm certainly also not claiming that I have the answer, that there's only one way. That's what's been helpful to me, will be helpful for you as well. Rather, my goal here really is just to share lessons that I've learned so far in my career that have helped me, and I hope you hear something that will resonate with you, big or small, as well. So with that as a preamble, let's jump right in with pearl number 1 and answer the first question you may have with, what's the deal with Eat Your Frog? Anyone know who this is? I can't see the chat, so just chat it in or just unmute yourself and please yell it out.
Mark Twain.
Thank you, Dr. Bello. Yeah. Mark Twain, who lived 1835 to 1910, and he said, if it's your job to eat a frog, it's best to do it first thing in the morning. And if it's your job to eat 2 frogs, it's best to eat the biggest one first. And I've had this quotation hanging in my Cornell office for years, even way before I thought about writing a book. And I think the meaning for me, I had it there and it was helpful because it reminded me that it was best to do the most important thing and or the item I was most likely to procrastinate as early as possible in the day or week or month or whatever time frame I was looking at. This is not without limitations. I'm not advocating only or always doing, challenging or difficult tasks and never having time for the more enjoyable aspects of life. Obviously, as you heard from the beginning, I love to travel and I love to read fiction as well. But I think the importance is just to acknowledge that we're all human, with strengths and weaknesses, including inertia, procrastination, and willpower. And does anyone remember or know this book, child's book, The Frog and Toad Collection? Well, I love these books, reading them with all 3 of my girls. I think they're so old that I may have read them as a child, Arnold Lobel. But to make a text-to-text connection, staying on trend here with frogs, my favorite in this collection is a book entitled Cookies. And in this story, Frog bakes cookies for Toad or vice versa, and brings them over. They're sitting there having cookies, and one says to the other, "We got to stop eating these cookies." And he says, "Okay, well, I'll close the box and just push it away. But we can." And the friend says, "We can open the box and take them out." The other guy says, "Okay, well, let's close the box and put a string on it. But we could cut the string and open the box." Well, we close the box, put the string, put it up on a high shelf so we can't reach it. And the other friend says, "We can always get it down." And so finally, they take the box, down and open the thread and open the box and put it outside. and the birds come and eat all the cookies, and one says to the other, see, now we can't eat any more cookies, and the other one says, harumph, I'm going home to bake a cake. And I like this story not only because I really like cookies and often feel like I have to put a tie on it on a high shelf, but also because it's a very clear defining of willpower as trying hard not to do something you really want to do, and conversely, trying hard to do something that you really want to. And yet how you get yourself into these things, get yourself to do these things, it's not a one size fits all. It really depends on your tendencies. And tendencies refer to as what I've shown here. This comes from one of my favorite authors as well, Gretchen Rubin, who's probably best known for her book about 10 to 15 years ago called The Happiness Project. And she defines these 4 categories of tendencies regarding how people meet outer and inner expectations. And understanding your own tendency can help you in your goal achievement, sometimes with ex-upholders who equally meet outer and inner expectations. Just putting something on the calendar is enough to get it done. Whereas an obliger who, meets outer expectations, but may have more difficulty meeting inner expectations, may need some sort of accountability or an accountability partner to get things done. I'm not going to go into all the tendencies, but if you're interested, go to GretchenRubin.com. And I think understanding your tendency can be helpful in getting things done in a way that works for you. So how does frog eating, if you will, set us up for success in terms of thriving in academic radiology or as being busy professional working parents? I think in 2 ways. One, I feel like it sets me up can set you up for success, because sort of come what may, the time period has already been a success if you've taken care of the most important thing, whatever that may be. And number 2, I think it really lessens the mental load, which is defined as, all the mental work, the organizing, the list making, and the planning, that you do to manage your life and those dependent on you. And most of us carry some form of mental load about our work, our household responsibilities, pets if we have them, financial obligations, elderly parents, and our personal life. So, what are some practical examples? Well, as a breast imager, I never missed the opportunity to remind people of annual screening mammography starting at age 40, continuing for as long as a woman is in good health. So when I'm on podcasts or have media opportunities related to this book, I mention that and just say, personally, how I live this out is, annual screening mammography, even for a breast imager, can be stressful. And so I make sure to schedule my annual screening mammogram as early as possible in the month, the week, and really the day that I'm going to get it done, which is helpful because then, 1, I'm setting myself up for success by taking care of myself physically. And 2, it's done, and all that mental space that I would otherwise spend stressing about it, I could redirect, to something else. So think for a moment, what's one current professional or personal frog you might have? And you may have more than one. So as we're reminded from the beginning, it's best to eat the biggest one first, whatever that may be. Rule number 2, 168 hours. So I was made aware of this obvious, math originally from an author called Laura Vanderkam. And the equation really is that, the fact of the math is that we all have the same 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 168 hours. So even if you sleep 8 hours a night, which, sounds absolutely delicious, and you work 50 hours a week, some people obviously more in certain positions, or less, as if we're no longer residents. But even if it was 50 hours a week, you would still have over 60 hours each week after work and after sleep to take care of your priorities. So it's not accurate to say you don't have time for something. Really, it would be more accurate to say there's time, but I'm not doing that because it's not a priority. And that's totally fine. But what it requires is clarity on your priorities, because you can't do everything, but there is time, 60 hours plus after work and sleep, more or less, to take care of what is most important to you. And I think, how does thinking about time in 160 hours, 8 hours help? I find it a very helpful concept instead of just, thinking about time in terms of 24 hours. And obviously this is, construct to some degree. And it makes me remember when I've, been stressed with a young child and I go to the pediatrician, I'm talking about what they eat. The only thing they ate today was, white bread, and I was in, or whatever it was at the time. And the pediatrician was like, it's more helpful also to think about what they ate over the course of a week. You might not get everything in a day, but if you think more broadly over the course of a week, it's a more realistic, fuller time frame. I don't know. There's always like a connection in my mind behind that. But specifically with respect to work, I think thinking about times in 168 hour helps in two ways, because one, it lessens the pressure, because whereas you can't get everything done in 24 hours, time is more elongated if you think about it in terms of 168 hours. And the weekend does count. This is hours, not necessarily to work, though it can be if that's what you want to be doing with your time or need to be doing with your time. And also, as I was saying before, it really insists that you clarify your priorities, because 168 hours, again, is not infinite, it's finite. And so you have to have clarity on your priorities so that you can choose what to do with your wild and precious life, as Mary Oliver says, but what you have, the time that you do have after work and sleep, that you care about. So how I personally apply this 168 hour concept is probably like once a quarter, or really whenever I'm feeling overwhelmed. You get a nice clean spreadsheet, Microsoft Excel spreadsheet, and I run the hours of the day on the left and the y-axis, and the days of the week on the x-axis. And I do have some sort of like themes to each day, where my theme of Monday is I'm reading body ultrasound, and my theme of Tuesday is I'm doing diags and mammo, and my theme for day 3 is, and so on and so forth. And then I like to color block out my time. And the first thing I'll do is I'll put in my time for sleep. This is shrinking it down and doesn't include it, but I will block out sleep in gray, like a phone, powering off or recharging from 11 to 7. Do I always sleep that time? Absolutely not. But it's more likely to happen if it's on the calendar. Then after that, I color block out my clinical time. Because while I'm taking care of patients, I really want to be monotasking and only doing that. And then after, and you can use whatever colors speak to you. But then after that, for me, it gets a little bit more colorful. I have 3 girls. They all have their own signature colors, which I use not only on my calendar, but just like for organizing things in the house, for their bags, whatever it is like Sophia, who's 17 and got into St. Andrews, is green, and Michaela, who's 14 now in 9th grade, is turquoise, and Jordana, the baby, who's 9, is purple. And so, I block out time every day for a family dinner. Is everyone there? No, but everyone understands we're aiming to try to convene, and anyone who is home will convene for a family dinner. And then I block off time to spend one-on-one time with each child. As the children age, it changes what we're doing. It used to be, bath and playtime. Now, with the younger one, we're reading books, and with the older 2, I'm often sitting in their bed while they're at their desk doing work, and I often have my laptop and sort of doing a second shift of work there. And then I also block out time for myself, because again, as we tell our patients, like you have to take care of yourself first before you can take care of anyone else. And for me, taking care of myself, starts with sleep, is for everyone, but also really important to me is having time to exercise. I just feel much better physically and mentally, and also sort of for intellectual pursuits like reading fiction, which I love. Chapter 3, or is pearl number 3, is if you fail to plan, you are planning to fail. Like, this is funny in context of starting this talk, because anyone who joined early may have seen that I exploded a Diet Coke on screen and have a huge stain on my shirt. So planning doesn't guarantee you're not going to have mishaps, but then all you can do is, you know, think about what you would do differently sometime. I'm not going to be opening any fizzy drinks anytime on screen before giving a talk. And really move on and try to be gentle with yourself. Okay, so is this one a little easier? Who's this?
Ben Franklin.
Thank you again. Maybe it's easier if you see him this way, but Benjamin Franklin was active as a writer, a scientist, an inventor, a statesman, a diplomat, a printer, a publisher, a political philosopher. He was one of the founding fathers of the United States, a drafter and signer of the Declaration of Independence, and the first postmaster general. So obviously this is a man who had a very full life. And he's been called the most accomplished American of his age and the most influential in inventing the type of society America would become. I'm sure he is rolling in his grave somewhere, but I don't want to digress with that. So let me stick to the course and say he was also less well known, but he's also an early person who was involved in self-analysis and self-accountability in terms of habits. And apparently he had like a list of 13 habits. And at the end of each day, he would grade himself on how he did. The meaning of this quotation, as I see it, is that, specifically also circling back to the previous pearl, it has to do with thinking through in advance how to intentionally use the time we have for our top priorities. Conversely, most people do not plan to fail, rather they fail to plan, and the result may be failure or lack of success in whatever was hoped for. And failure may, of course, still happen with planning, as we were discussing in a small way. And more recently, it's certainly been written about, including in the radiology literature, about the importance of failure, if not, about not taking the importance of taking risks, failing up, etc. And yet, I would say with planning, there's a greater chance of success or learning from mistakes, right? So, I wrote this book was published again 3 years ago, and I wrote this in the first quarter of 2021. So now it's been almost 5 years since I wrote the book, and the methods that I use have continued to evolve with time. And now I would actually say, for the best summary in terms of planning at regular intervals, daily, weekly, monthly, seasonally, annually, this book by Sarah Hart Unger, which came out in December, mentions a lot of the methods I'm going to talk about, but it's like the most succinct and excellent book. I highly, highly recommend it. I have one on my desk. I'm not financially connected to her at all. Okay, it's blurry, but you see it on the screen. And so I recommend this book. She mentioned many of, basically, this chapter of the book came out of a speed mentoring topic that I did for FAAWR at ACR meetings and RSNA meetings. And I got such good feedback I was signed up to talk about, planning in the short and long term. And I got such good feedback from that, give it in certain number of iterations in different audiences. And it really became, that talking experience really became the basis for my book and the first chapter around which the other 7 were written. And so for me, the top 3 key resources I use for planning still to this day include, in terms of methodology, Getting Things Done by David Allen. This was an oldie but a goodie, written in, I think, in 2001. I still like a low tech, Getting Things Done is more of a ground up approach. I still like a physical planner. What I have used for many years now, it's not coming out well on screen, is the Full Focus Planner first created by Michael Hyatt. That is a more top-down approach. And then, because we're living in a digital age, I've been using for past over a decade Todoist as a task management app. So just briefly going into each one. So Getting Things Done rests on the premise that the mind is for having ideas, not for holding them. And talks about really was one of the earliest to talk about the importance of regular planning, again, on a daily. He calls that, he uses like an aerodynamic analogy or approach, that the runway level is your daily task. 10,000 feet is sort of the weekly planning. 20,000 feet is your monthly planning, where you should think about all of the domains of responsibility, and so on and so up to 50,000, where 50,000 foot view is really thinking about your purpose in life and your sort of your vision. And you may think like, hold on, I barely have time to think about getting dinner on the table, let alone like, what is the meaning of life? And that's the beauty of this, because by having a regular time and a specified method for capturing all your inputs, all the things that are coming at you, either in a physical inbox, a professional email, personal email, etc., and regularly processing it based on the 5 steps that he recommends, capturing it, clarifying it. I'll go into this in a second, that you will have, your mind will be for having ideas, not for holding it. So he talks about the importance of capturing everything in your inbox. When he wrote this book in 2001, it was just like a physical inbox, which I still have here. And now we all probably have multiple inboxes like the one I mentioned. And with each, when you have a time to process it, you want to ask for each piece of paper or each email, is it actionable? If it's not, delete it. If the wisdom is, if you can do it in 2 minutes or less, to do it. Think about whether you can delegate the task. I think delegation has historically or traditionally been more difficult for women. And think about whether you can delegate it. Can you defer it? Are you going to defer it? And if so, are you going to put it specifically on your calendar, or on a task management list, which I will get to with Todoist. And then to reflect regularly. And lastly, to engage, which you can do, where you do the next delineated action with confidence, because you trust the system of organization that you're doing what you should be doing at where you should be doing it at the right time. And so again, this is sort of a bottom-up approach, and the full focus planner is more of a top-down approach, which I'll explain. And I have found using these two, bottom-up, top-down, it's not like I never drop any balls, but hopefully I drop less balls than I would have. And I feel like, whereas there's no perfect one method, this helps me to keep on top of stuff as much as reasonably possible, and that's helpful. So this is the paper planner. I still use my 4-color pen. I've been using it constantly since 7th grade, and I'm very attached to the 4-color pen. Maybe you have a special pen that makes writing those things sort of more pleasurable, and so I say use tools that you like. This planner starts with a delineation, asking you to delineate no more than 10 to 12 goals for the year at the annual level. And I try to do this in different domains of my life, personally, in terms of my relationships and my career. I think it's often easy to know what maybe you want to do in your career, but putting sort of a stake in the ground that you're also going to plan for goals for yourself personally and those that you love makes it so that you are hopefully clear that these are priorities, that they are, and that they play a part in your life. So then each full focus planner is like a 90-day planner. So it's like you have 4, one for each quarter of the year. And it asks you to just delineate from that list of 10 to 12 annual goals. Just pick 2 or 3 that you're going to work on this quarter. And sometimes this, it's really clear what you need to choose. Like, for example, if you're going up for, ACR fellowship, for example, the deadline may be in June, but you have to get into your chapter by, I can't remember what it is anymore, but like March. And so the time sensitivity is going to dictate when some of your annual goals need to be addressed. And then it's sort of a trickle down approach where your 2 to 3 quarterly goals trickle down into informing your 2 to 3 monthly goals. your weekly big three goals and your daily big three goals. And there's also a weekly review, time to reflect on how far you've got on your weekly goals, what went well, what didn't. Again, about lessons learned and moving forward. And then finally, again, we live in a digital age, so I really like to do this as a task management system. It's location-based and medium-based, and for each task, you can enter a date when you want to start it. And I also try to add an estimation of how long I think it's going to get done. It's kind of remarkable how wildly we may be off on our time estimation. We may be thinking we're getting things done much faster than we really are. And that's important to learn, because if you're scheduling too much and you think you can get done, but it takes much more time, then you're really not setting yourself up for success. So how do I put these all three together? Really in the short term, which I think about is the daily or weekly planning. You know, I still practice both breast and body imaging, but when I was doing my breast imaging fellowship, we always used to prep the needle localization. We were using needles back in the day, 2 days in advance, so that if you were missing anything, you had that one day in the middle as a buffer to get the physical films from, Columbia if they were coming to Cornell, Center. So that prepping 2 days in advance was really instilled upon me from my training. And for that, I look at the day. At the end of the day, I look at the day that's completed, and I look at the next 2 days forward, to see what's on the landscape and what I need to do. I will confirm, professional meetings, personal playdates for the kids, and everything in between. I'll look at my to-do list, and see if there's anything that has to be done today that didn't get done, and I'll migrate it to a more reasonable time. With email, when I wrote this book, I mean, it's interesting just to see the difference. But when I first wrote this, 5 years ago, I was still aiming for daily inbox zero. There's no way, that I could realistically achieve that now, nor do I think it's the highest and best use of my time. I do aim for inbox zero once a week. It lasts for about maybe 2 minutes, and then it returns. But I just know that's what I'm aiming for, so I'm not missing anything. On a daily level, for my my professional email, I do color code them by category. So if I just look quickly, I can see if there this is patient related that I have to do today, or clinical imaging, or whatever. And then I do use my physical planner to set my daily, weekly goals as discussed. So at the longer term, I really do the same thing. I'm using my three basic, the calendar, my planner, and Todoist. And at the monthly level, I think more broadly, as David Allen talks about, in terms of my spheres of responsibility, professionally and personally. And the mnemonic I've been using for really, I guess, 10 or 15 years now for myself professionally is care. Because I want to think about what would be success clinically in the clinical domain, administratively, research and education. And then personally, I think, about myself and my relationships. Quarterly, I tend to do, it's really the same process with the same tools, but I'm looking sort of a level up and looking back to my 10 to 12 annual goals and, looking at them, do any need to be removed or revised? And which 2 to 3 am I going to focus on in the next quarter? So, in some, I think thinking about time in 168 instead of 24-hour chunks, and in conjunction with these 3 planning resources can really be helpful to help you see that you do have time for your priorities, whatever they may be. It's a pause. Rule number 4, to remember the pre-meeting meeting and that you're not an imposter. And I first learned about the pre-meeting meeting from Dr. Cannon. I still remember Dr. Sherry Cannon at the University of Alabama. I still remember distinctly where I was when I heard about it. It was 7 a.m. at an ACR meeting. It was the FAAWR Power Hour, and we were in some absolutely freezing room. And she was giving a talk, and then in the midst of it, she talked about the importance of pre-meeting meeting, which she defines as really essential. And she talked about how and here there's we're making a gender divide, but that she really recommended that women should do the pre-work necessary to prepare for important meetings. And she talked about how at board meetings, the decisions have frequently already been made before the meeting even starts. And men have pre-meetings, have discussed how they will vote and know their talking points, and that women may be more inclined to approach board meetings or other important meetings differently as they prepare and bring data with them, and that the hopes that there will be a collective discussion and a group decision. And she was advocating for women to have pre-meetings too. And I think I was just blown away when I heard this, and it really changed my perspective professionally and how I have moved from there. And I think it's really, the idea of a pre-meeting meeting is really essential for anyone looking to have any successful meeting, especially about a contentious issue, because there are opportunities for information gathering, for coalition building, building trust and rapport with allies, and also potential detractors, really sort of like street testing and refining arguments and perspectives, so that by the time of the actual meeting, you have a well set up justification for your point of view. And additionally, to be effective, and this must have been when I heard about it, 2000, I think it was 17 or 18, and this completely informed the all future work for me and everyone at FAAWR who worked towards paid family medical leave, in terms of how we maneuvered at society and national level. So additionally, to be effective, at either and also say, most of us are probably familiar with the post-meeting meeting, sort of the huddle afterwards to discuss, what went well, what can we do better. And this is the correlate. Instead of the post-meeting meeting, this is the pre-meeting meeting. And really, to be effective at either or both the pre-meeting or the actual meeting, one thing that is not helpful is imposter syndrome. Again, when I wrote this in 2020, there was a lot less written, I feel like, about imposter syndrome. And I like to think in some small way, I have brought out the topic at least in radiology, with colleagues like Dr. McGinty, who with me were on a panel at RSNA in 2019 about this topic. So imposter syndrome is defined as persistent inability to believe that one's success is deserved or has been legitimately achieved as a result of one's own effort and skills. And although it's never been an official diagnosis in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, the DSM, imposter syndrome was initially described by psychologists in the 1970s as tending to particularly occur among highly driven individuals who had difficulty genuinely believing in and owning their achievements. Instead, enduring self-doubt and anxiety that others will eventually uncover them as frauds, because they believe, despite objective external evidence to the contrary, that their success is somehow due to luck rather than ability. And here are three examples of more modern than Thomas Jefferson and Mark Twain, who identify or have talked about experiencing imposter syndrome. Michelle Obama in her book Becoming talks about, quote, "I still have a little imposter syndrome. It doesn't go away, that feeling that you shouldn't take me that seriously. What do I know? I share that with you because we all have doubts in our abilities," in the former First Lady, and about our power and what that power is. Tom Hanks, I guess I'm dating myself. I love the movie Big, if anyone here has seen it as well. But he talks about, no matter what we've done, there comes a point when you think, how did I get here? When are they going to discover that I am in fact a fraud and take everything away from me? And then Sheryl Sandberg, one of the wealthiest women in the world, in her Harvard grad, former Facebook CEO, wrote in her book Lean In, quote, "Every time I took a test, I was sure it had gone badly. And every time I didn't embarrass myself or even excelled, I believed that I'd fooled everyone once again. One day, the jig would soon be up." So in other words, imposter syndrome happens. It's in and beyond medicine, men and women. It's real. So I think how does talking about the pre-meeting meeting and imposter syndrome help in terms of being professional working individuals. And I think that it would be helpful to abandon imposter syndrome and really adopt the pre-meeting meeting. And as something I certainly did, this is a image from the ACR meeting. I see Amy Kotzinis there when I was presenting for the reference committee about our paid family medical leave resolution, which was passed. And now the ACR is still the first, as far as I know, only medical society to have a resolution asking us to strive to provide 12 weeks of paid family medical leave, including for our residents. So the goal would be to abandon imposter syndrome, hard as it may be, or make progress on it, and to adopt the pre-meeting meeting. Rule number 5. Dr. Bello, when I ID this person, or anyone who studied French or philosophy majors in college, let's not put all the pressure on. Anyone? Anyone? So this is Voltaire, who this quotation is attributed to him, who was a French philosopher in the 1700s. And I don't have this hanging in my clinical office because I still strive as close to perfection as humanly possible in my clinical care. But the meaning of this, as I see it, beyond clinical care, and I can say this as a recovering perfectionist, is to strive to be instead a satisficer. And this is a real word, which means that satisficers are those who make a decision or take action once their criteria are met. Doesn't mean they'll settle for mediocrity. Their criteria can be very, very high, but as soon as you find that restaurant or the hotel or that you're looking for that has the qualities you're seeking, you're satisfied and move on. In contrast to a perfectionist, also can be thought of as a maximizer who wants to make the optimal decision. And we often want to make the optimal decision, but even if you see the perfect, I don't know, if you're looking into a bicycle or a photographer for an event or what have you that would meet your requirements, perfectionists often find they can't make a decision until they've examined every option, so they know they're making the quote best possible choice. And yet, seeking perfection can really be problematic. Why is that? So, as a former Forbes article explains, studies suggest that satisficers are happier than maximizers because while the latter expend more and more time and effort to come to a decision, they still may feel anxious about whether their decision was the best one. FOMO is applicable not only to events, but also to choices and, the fear of missing out on what you did not choose. And FOMO has been linked with depression. And a Harvard Business Review also noted, quote, "We should all strive to do our best. But if you always aim for perfection, you may blow deadlines, inform your colleagues, and miss out on opportunities. Also consider how perfectionism impacts your relationships, personally and professionally. Are you setting unrealistic standards for those around you? And also the need to have it perfect will also, as I was saying, may annoy others and extreme cases drive them away. So for the sake of others and your own, learn to be satisfied with good enough. And again, good enough does not mean accepting mediocrity. It can be, and can and should be setting very high standards. And yet once the standards or qualities are met, then to sort of confirm and move on. I think that this can be, hard. Of all the pearls, this is probably the one that I self-talk in my head to myself the most. But how trying to not strive for perfection can be helpful is in this way. Since perfection is obviously humanly impossible, trying to achieve something that is not impossible can really lead to feelings of hopelessness and anxiety. And I think one of the small ways you can start, just in the next hour after this talk, just listen to your own speech and the speech of people around you. you will hear, it is sort of shocking if you start listening and paying attention and counting how many times you hear the word perfect, perfect, perfect. It's like absolutely inundates our vocabulary. And so I think, listening to yourself and trying not to use the word perfection, I have tried to stop not using the word perfection and being more precise or using another word, because I think using the word perfection really sets unrealistic standards, and that is not helpful at all. And I think it can be, so an example, planning for date night with my husband on Saturday. I will, have blocked off on the calendar for Saturday. Does it happen every Saturday? Definitely not, but it's more likely to happen since we have time blocked out on the calendar. Say I'm looking for a Mexican restaurant with, good margaritas at their happy hour within, a 10-minute walk when it's not so freezing. Once I find that restaurant and meets those three qualities, I book the reservation and I'm done. I remind myself not to keep scrolling through and looking for that quote perfect restaurant, because the perfect restaurant doesn't exist. And professionally, I always come to mind this example. One advice I've seen about this in the literature is just trying in maybe a small stake setting to relax your standards and see if there is, any problem with it. So I was reminded of the time that I received a request from my former division chief asking for slides about screening mammography, because that's something I, have worked on for a meeting she was gonna give, and so I set a timer, for how long I thought was reasonable to prepare this. And when the timer went off, I spell checked it and sent it to her. And having these, boundaries was helpful, because if I, hadn't, and I was trying to make it perfect and get the right font and it's all in alignment and this, that, and the other, I could have been, I may have been still working on it, but like literally within 5 or 10 minutes, I got an email back from her which said, perfect. And I would, if I hadn't sort of set boundaries and sort of relaxed my, stopped striving for perfection, whatever that was, I would still be working on it. But now I could move on to other things that I wanted to work on, maybe like having more time to sit with a patient in silence, as we talked about a difficult diagnosis, or whatever you may have. So this is talking about looking at your listening to yourself and others, and watching your language. This is also really relevant to the next pearl, which is to stop over apologizing. Another one that is, I find, often quite hard to do. And I first heard about this from Dr. Resac, who, as you all know, was the chair of Memorial Sloan Kettering Radiology until very recently, almost a quarter of a century. She's also a RSNA Gold Medal winner, and this year an ACR Gold Medal winner. And as she likes to say, she's had continuous funding probably since many of us were born. So she talked about, she spoke at the mentorship program for women in radiology, that I started at Cornell really early on, like 2010 or so. And at the time, she'd already been chair for, over a decade. And she described how she just noted that people, obviously come into her office all the time, men and women, asking for things, promotion, a raise, more space. But then she noticed that women will often start, by apologizing. And she defined over apologizing as not only apologizing too frequently, but also when it was not indicated. Like it was just not indicated in these situations. And whereas over apologizing when it is indicated, I think can be a real interpersonal strength. Over apologizing does not help us as professional working parents, because among other things, it projects weakness both professionally and personally. And it really primes the person you're asking not to grant your request. And I think we especially don't want to model this for our children, especially I find for my girls. So my mother was a PhD psychologist, and she passed away 2 years ago this month. But I still like to keep quoting her, and this is in the book, so her teaching continues. When I was talking to her about this while I was writing the book, she observed, quote, girls and women have been groomed from a very young age to say, I'm sorry, almost as easily as along with please and thank you. So it's not that it's a natural biological differences between girls and boys, men and women. It's about nurture. Yes, boys are taught to say please and thank you and I'm sorry, but with girls, it's at another level. Whereas they are groomed to be more accommodating, whereas girls are groomed to be more accommodating, in contrast, boys to be more entitled. These are her words. Saying I'm sorry is part of that, along with being accommodating of others, often ahead of oneself, thus putting oneself on the back burner, which can obviously have profound and divergent effects in the professional sphere. This pearl, stop over apologizing, is also, of course, as all these pearls, not without its limitations. So many people may find it hard to even see or admit that they've been wrong, let alone apologize. So if you fall into this category, then it might be the first thing to work on. Because obviously under apologizing can be detrimental to relationships personally and professionally. And yet, if you're like most women and girls raised in Western society and likely beyond, you probably are more likely to fall in the over apologizing category rather than in the under apologizing category. And if so, then this pearl is for you. So my last two pearls are, again, this one is about it doesn't hurt to ask politely. And I'll touch on this one as we come to the top of the hour, because the last one is about having the importance of a growth mindset, which I think is really applicable in helping living out these pearls and beyond. So I just want to mention this one, which I first heard from Dr. Carol Rudnack, the first president of the AAWR in 1981. And she wrote a great article in the JACR in 2016, where she talks about there are so many social pressures discouraging women from asking. Social expectations typically include that women should wait to be asked to marry, to join a team, to be promoted. And this really can create anxiety for women because they prefer not to take a risk and offend their peers. And an important concept is that women may see control because of this as external to outside of themselves, or as a failure resulting from a personal weakness. And I just think it's important to note this theme of potentially multiple sources of anxiety, particularly for women. And what happens so her article was about women don't ask. And to this I have tacked on politely, because I think it's still really a catch-22 situation, where accomplishments that are not visible to your leader or chair of a department will certainly not result in promotion or raise or whatever you're striving for. On the other hand, realistically, there really are still certainly there can be problems arising from strongly, asserting, from being assertive or pointing out what you have accomplished. People can describe women as being bossy, or on the other hand, if they're not speaking up, too shy and submissive. So it's a really, I feel like, a catch-22 or a balance beam that we're working on, and how I've tried to address that is adding on politely to it, because obviously there are some limitations to this, as all of pearls. For some things like harassment-free workplace, pay equality, asking politely is too tepid. It must be demanded. As I have this picture from the 2017 Women's March in Washington to remind us. And it does make me feel a little sad that I feel the need to include politely, because polite is in some ways considered a synonym for well-behaved, as this 1976 book by Laurel Ulrich makes clear. So, but still, I feel like asking politely, you can't go, it's less likely to go wrong, because I feel like, if anything, our society is in need of more respect and politeness, and that can be helpful. So at the top of the hour, I would just say, if you do ask, the worst you can hear is no, and yet you might hear yes. So this is why it is really important to ask. And if you do so politely and respectfully, it's hard to argue with that. The final pearl, as I mentioned, is the importance of having a growth mindset. And more has been talked about this, in radiology and beyond, since this book came out 3 years ago. summarized by this graphic, which I really like. This is Julia Child, who I talk about as well. So I don't think we have time necessary for individual questions. However, I really encourage you, please reach out over email, ELA9033@cornell.edu, or you can certainly find me online. And I have also had the thrill of recording this book and self-narrating it, a real live recording studio, which is great. So it's also available on audio, so you can pair it with, commuting or what have you. And then this is the new book, which came out in November of 2025. This is my first foray into children's literature. It's the first of, there will be 2 more installments of the Bye Bye series later this year, which will be Bye Bye Baba and Bye Bye Binky, and come all from my experience raising my 3 girls. So with that, I thank you for your time and opportunity to speak with you. So thank you again.
Elizabeth, on behalf of the New York State Radiology Society, thank you so much for the excellent lecture. I think, a lot of the pearls that you talked about resonate with many of us. If you're willing to take maybe a question or two, we could open it up
Sure.
to everybody on the Zoom call. Does anybody have a question or something they'd like to address with Dr. Arleo? Anybody? If not, I have a quick one for you. It may not be too quick, but we can make it quick. Which is, I think that as you rise in leadership, you've got so many great pearls about schedules and how to best schedule your life, the color coding, and the personal as well as the professional. But what throws people off a lot of time is what's not scheduled, right? That throws a kink into what you have as a perfectly scheduled day or week or month, right? And often these are hard issues. So how do you deal with those?
100%. I mean, I think, most recently for all of us, the COVID-19 pandemic absolutely threw 2020 for such a change in the world that nobody could have anticipated it. And so what you may have started off 2020 with your 10 to 12 annual goals really required a significant pivot, for Q2. I think, again, having a plan is important because you are aware of your priorities and your intentions, and then you may need to pivot. I think that the seasonal aspect of having annual goals, just like 10 to 12, can be helpful because sometimes the time-sensitive nature will help you achieve some things. I remember specifically during 2020, I wanted to apply for a fellowship of the ACR, and because of the deadlines external to me, I had gotten all the documents, everything in by March 1st. I was dealing with it the first quarter of the year, and if I hadn't done that, it would have never happened. So even though there were a number of 2020 goals that I completely had to pivot on, by having that goal and sort of having a seasonal time to address it, it did help me get done, even though I had to let go of others. And absolutely, we all experience, personally and professionally, things that require, the best laid plans, having to pivot to a plan B. But I think it can still be helpful to have a plan for whatever your, daily, weekly, monthly, or beyond, you're planning, because then you can look very, say you have a plan for the day and you have, all of a sudden you have a sick child who has to stay home from school, or you have a colleague who's out and you have to double cover it. Well, then you have your plan and you can look at it and think, okay, well, plan A, oh, it looks lovely, but I have to pivot from that. What of what I have planned in this day, week, whatever, is absolutely essential to getting done, and can I get that done? And I'm gonna, defer what's not essential to another time period. But having an original plan so you have some sense of what is essential and what you can let go given last minute things, I think can be really, really helpful.
No, absolutely. Completely agree. And I think that, again, something that I think COVID taught all of us was the importance of flexibility, All right. And it's another term for pivoting.
Exactly.
So, anybody else have a question? We are over
I
in
do.
time.
Yeah,
Oh,
I
go
do
ahead.
have a quick question. Jenny Bencardino. Thank you, Dr. Arleo. Wonderful presentation. My question is regarding delegating and whether the trouble that we have delegating is rather over controlling and how that impacts our team because we are not going to live forever and there are people coming behind us. So what advice do you have in that regard?
I couldn't entirely hear the question. Um, could you repeat it again? Something about being over controlling and working with teams but can you repeat the
Yes.
bottom line question? I
Yeah.
think that's better.
Yeah, it
Better.
was
Okay.
regarding delegating that you
Yes.
say that women have trouble delegating.
Yeah.
So my question is it trouble delegating or is it over controlling and how that impact teams, you know?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. One of the things that comes to mind when you ask that, I think about I've most recently delegated in the past 2 or 3 years to sort of get something off my plate, but also have someone step up and do something they are perfectly capable of doing, but weren't and want to. Holiday cards, like okay, I might decide I'm not sending holiday cards, but we still want to. So instead, I delegated that to my two teenagers. Did the cards come out exactly as I wanted? As I would have done it? No. Does that matter? No. I just asked them to please get approval from all members of the family before they ordered it. And I don't try not to let the perfect be the enemy of the good, and unless again it's patient care. So I think that there can be different standards for what you're dealing with. Not different standards. Again, you can say I'm going to delegate this to you. My expectations are that it meets criteria A, B, and C, and once that that's I think a way of balancing control and delegating because you're expressing again the criteria that you'd like to have met, and once if that criteria is met, then for team harmony and your sanity and everyone's sanity, then if those are met, then you should be able to hopefully move on. It doesn't again meaning accepting mediocrity. You can set high standards, and when they're met, they're done and you move on. I don't know if that helpful answers the question to some degree.
Thank you so much. Yes, it does.
Alrighty, I think we're going to have to end. And thank you again so much, Elizabeth. It's a pleasure having you with us. Thank you, everybody, for joining too.